You're listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. To hear the full show each day, tune in to AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN or log in to accesswdun.com and click the Listen Live button from 9 to 11, Monday through Friday. There's a guy on a podcast called Ruthless Podcast. He's called Comfortably Smug, and he said, today is going to be an insane day. That's what he said yesterday, too. And it's one of those days where everything changes. Also from the Ruthless Podcast is John Ashbrook, my old friend from many paths that we have crossed. And he joins us on a regular basis to talk about politics. So I love Comfortably Smug. I do. John, he is amazing.
Yeah. He's a very funny guy.
He is very funny. And he doesn't care.
It's hard not to like him.
Yeah, he doesn't care. And I, like you, cannot wait for him to have children so that he can be followed around.
He's going to be a complete mess.
It's going to be a complete mess. So, speaking of complete messes, we've got the Democratic primaries that kind of went as we expected, and with a couple of surprises. American Samoa, evidently they're quite independent. Yeah. They voted for Bloomberg a few years ago. They like the business guys. And this kind of interesting, uncommitted theme we're seeing against Biden. I would say out on the Democrat side, that was the biggest surprises.
Yeah, I know. I think that's right, Martha. Not just a surprise, but also a real message to Biden that his own party is not consolidated behind him. You know, there's so much focus from the media on how Republicans are split and they haven't figured out how to come together around Donald Trump, while Democrats have not figured out how to come together around their incumbent president. In fact, they've become more divided over a bunch of different issues, including this war in Israel and Gaza, where so many of the hard left-wingers are, for whatever reason, aligning with Hamas. And so their party is coming apart at the seams, maybe at the right time for Republicans in November. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to be too excited because 2022, I was pretty sure of myself, and it went a different way. It's 8 months. Yeah, that makes two of us. Yeah, it's 8 months, which is a long time. Anything can happen. But let's talk about the Republican side. Of course, at the end of last night, we did not know what Nikki Haley was going to do. She did win one primary in Vermont. She had won the D.C. primary on Sunday, but that's, not a lot. It's not a lot. So the writing was on the wall. The president came out, and former president came out and gave a pretty good speech, I thought. But we did not hear from Nikki Haley, but we know now we're going to hear from her at 10 o'clock this morning. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, well, that's right, Martha. I mean, we're about an hour away from a moment that many people saw coming for weeks, for months. Not to say that in my own household, where I've got girls who are rooting on Nikki pretty hard, were bummed last night when she didn't pull it out. But the reality is, she's going to get out of the race, but she's withholding her endorsement for now. You probably saw that. She's saying she wants Trump to earn the support of her voters. And, that could mean a couple of different things. It could be a negotiating position for making her the vice president. It could be a posture that sends her into November if somehow President Trump comes up short against Biden again. It gives her the ability to say, look, I tried to present an alternative. The polls looked really good for me when I was still running, and I probably would have won this race had I been the nominee. So a couple of different options for her. I think that ultimately Republicans are going to rally around President Trump. You mentioned his remarks last night. He really struck a serious tone. He wasn't dunking on Haley or his opponents. He immediately was talking about crime and immigration and the economy and all of those things that are so concerning to voters out there, particularly those voters in the middle who are dissatisfied with Joe Biden. They don't like Biden because the border is open and out of control, and obviously that's has extremely tragic consequences in your neck of the woods lately, and not in Virginia too, actually. And the economy is not great. Biden points to the stock market, says some people are doing well. Well, there are a lot of others who are still struggling to afford these grocery prices, and the crime is through the roof in cities like Washington, D.C., and you have the left fighting the Atlanta police and Governor Kemp tooth and nail just because they're trying to build a training center. So there are real issues in our country that will be litigated in this presidential primary or this presidential general election. And to the extent that Trump can continue to talk about what dissatisfies voters, that will help him earn some of these Haley voters back, I think.
Well, on the immigration issue, too, it's a very layered thing. You've got the crimes you can point to, like the murder of Laken Riley and others, but also layered on top of that is the fentanyl poisoning and the human trafficking, which I think is 21st century slavery is what it is. Let's call it what it is. And we're letting it happen in this country. And it's all at the hands of the Biden administration. So you've got this kind of crime picture, you're right, that you can paint that is really all at the hands of Joe Biden. And I did have a Democrat call in yesterday and say, well, but the economy's so good. And I said, well, yeah, corporations are doing well and the stock market's great and people that are getting close to retirement are really happy, okay, because their 401ks are doing great. But the average person who's going to the grocery store, you can't have, you're still paying twice as much for all the basics. You're still paying a lot more for things, and real people care more about what they're shelling out every week than they are about what's going to happen in 30 years.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. And I actually think that Biden is going to make it worse on Thursday night in his State of the Union, because he's not going to make a nod to people who are actually paying higher prices and take any responsibility for it himself. He's going to blame the grocery store for charging more. But everybody knows the grocery store wouldn't be charging more if it didn't cost them more to be able to get the things they want to sell.
Yes, absolutely.
So he's going to hide the ball on Thursday on that. He's going to hide the ball on immigration, and everybody knows the truth. So he will continue to look inauthentic and dishonest. And then contrasting with that, you will have Katie Britt as the Republican voice responding to him. She's a senator from Alabama, a neighboring state. She's the youngest woman in the Senate, and she's going toe-to-toe with the oldest man to ever be president. And she's going to be a great voice for Republicans. Very excited to have her doing that. And I'm confident that Trump will release some kind of a pushback video or statement on Biden's State of the Union. So I think, on one level, especially for, the Nikki fans out there, it's sort of a bittersweet moment, but it also provides an opportunity to pivot and go directly into Joe Biden. He says he's going to let Joe be Joe. He's going to go for Trump's jugular. I think Republicans have the ability to show him what that actually means.
Well, she accomplished more than any Republican woman has ever accomplished as far as that goes. And so I'm going to be happy about that. I thought she was a great alternative. But you know what? We've got to win this election. And I'm thinking about running mates. Katie Britt would be a great choice because you'd get a Republican senator there. It's not a problem. Mm-hmm. Nikki Haley. I was listening to Tulsi Gabbard this morning, and I know Tulsi's got this kind of quirky side to her, this kind of Bernie Sanders streak, because she used to be a Democrat. But she wouldn't be a bad choice either. So it would be an outside-the-box choice, but it might neutralize the no labels and the other kinds of things that are going on. It would be an interesting choice, I think. So we'll see what happens with all of that. But I do think that the State of the Union is going to be great because you guys at Ruthless Podcast are going to be doing a live show, right?
Yeah, we are. And we've started to do these every year. And it's a little bit lighter, to be honest with you, Martha. We do not dive too deeply into the nuts and bolts of policy, but we try our best in real time to call out Biden's BS. And so it makes for a lot of fun. And a lot of jokes. So encourage everybody who's interested to tune in an alternate viewing of the State of the Union.
Yeah, and you can do that through YouTube. And if you're not following the Ruthless podcast on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcasts, you ought to. It's fun. It's irreverent. There's a little bit of language, so I got to warn you about that. But I'm the kind of person that my dad used to say that using bad language means you didn't have a good vocabulary. So I have that voice in my head, but I really do enjoy the show and I laugh along, and we've got to laugh. You give great advice. You do great analysis. You're funny people, but you also have been in the business for a long time and you know what you're talking about.
And try not to take ourselves too seriously. We poke as much fun at each other as we do anything else. So
that's right.
We have a good time.
So what do you think? Now I know that they've said she's not going to endorse in this speech, but do you think she'll be complimentary? What should we be looking for? Because we'll be listening to it when it comes up at the top of the hour. What should we be looking for? What would be kind of something that would be different?
Well, I'm as eager as anybody to hear what she has to say. I'm going to be listening for anything she says that's sort of a clue of her intentions for 2028, or even if she's going to leave the door open to accepting a VP nod from Trump. She's not going to say that directly, of course, but if she starts saying things about, make her choices about consolidating, I encourage my voters to really give him a good look and give him every consideration. And I encourage Trump to say what these voters are interested in. She could make a speech about suburban voters who are dissatisfied with the message they've heard from Trump over the last several years and want something different. Quite frankly, you were talking about potential VPs. I think that she would be a very, very smart choice for him.
Oh, I agree.
And I hope he takes her. I really do. And so we'll see if there's any softening at all on him. She basically makes the case to voters that sort of sounds like what Trump might be hearing from political advisors, saying, listen, Mr. President, we have a very big problem in some of these suburban areas. We have to address those problems. And then you have Nikki basically saying something very similar to that he'd be hearing from his advisors. So that's kind of what I'm listening for, Martha. But I guess we'll find out soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you that she would be the best choice. And Lord knows it's happened plenty of times where the two people that ran against each other the hardest ended up running together. I mean, Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush. There's lots of other examples of that. But it is a way to show you want to unite the party, because it does take some chutzpah to be able to do that. Because if you look in a mirror and you see a president looking back at you, you've probably got a pretty big ego. Okay, so to be able to work with somebody like that shows you really put the party and the country before your own ego.
Mm-hmm. If you look at these exit polls from Super Tuesday, they showed a very clear pattern that men and women were divided in this primary. And I know that Trump won in almost all of the states, but if you look at who women were voting for, a disproportionate number were moving toward Nikki. And Republicans know that one of the most difficult issues that they will face this fall will be the same issue that was difficult for them in 2022, and that's abortion. And Nikki Haley has a message on that no other candidate could have delivered this entire cycle. So I think that for a whole host of reasons, he should take somebody like her as his number two.
John Ashbrook, appreciate you always being on the program and being available. And you guys should follow the Ruthless podcast. You will learn a lot and laugh a little bit. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you, Martha.
It's where North Georgia comes to talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
We got to hold together a coalition that goes from the never Trumpers to folks who might have marched with Antifa. That's a hard coalition to hold together.
It is the Martha Zoller Show, and somebody jumped in. That was Van Jones. That was one of those pieces of audio. You know, they used to say Antifa didn't really exist. And so he said, march with Antifa. And the guy was jumping in to say, oh, what do you mean with Antifa? You know, and then he goes, yeah, BLM, Antifa, all that kind of stuff. But they exist. Okay, it's really silly. It exists. And then also, so Van Jones actually has gone from being a total progressive hack to being a liberal that kind of looks at things objectively. I don't agree with him on any of his conclusions. I don't think he's right about things, but he has come to a place where he's not just saying what the people tell him to say. He's not just reading the talking points. So I think that's good about him. He's worth a watch if you can get him, because it's really important, guys, and I cannot stress this enough. As much as it makes you crazy and mad, you have got to listen and watch things you don't agree with. Because the only way you're going to figure out, one, how to defend your position, and two, what's wrong with the other side, is to actually expose yourself. And three, maybe realize something you might have gotten wrong or a position you hadn't thought about. I went to lunch yesterday with a friend, and she has a different point of view than I do about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it kind of is born in how terrible it looks to see all the destruction. And of course it does. Of course it does. But the destruction came about because of an attack that happened on Israel on a Sabbath. You know, there's all this talk about Ramadan. We got to get things straightened out by Ramadan because we don't want to have a war during Ramadan. But it was perfectly okay to attack Israel on a Sabbath day, on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur. It was, or in the Yom Kippur week. I don't know if it was exactly on the day, but it was an anniversary. It was a Sabbath. It was all of that. It was perfectly okay to attack on a day like that. But you've got this situation where, yeah, it is terrible. It is really terrible to see what's happened. It is terrible that the Palestinian people are not aligned with the Israelis to get rid of Hamas so that they can have freedom. It is terrible that Israel has to telegraph everything they do so that they can try to get civilians out of the way. But Hamas doesn't want to let the civilians out of the way. And finally, we believe these numbers that Hamas puts out, but they cannot verify how many hostages are still alive. So they can tell you that thousands of people have been killed, down to the penny, down to the number, but they can't tell you how many hostages are still alive. And if they're all alive, it's 136. But I doubt that they all are. That's why they're not releasing anybody. So how can you trust an organization to report on that gives you these tens of thousands numbers when they can't even verify to you a list of 135 or 136 people and what their status is, when we know who these people are? We have a starting list of who these people were. We know how many have been released. We know how many should be left. We're not talking about counting tens of thousands. We're talking about 130-something. And they can't answer that question, but you're going to believe them. And I don't mean you, but I mean people that are taking that position. You're going to believe them on the tens of thousands? I don't think so. I don't think they've earned that right, because they haven't shown that they tell the truth about anything. Now, this other piece of audio that we're going to play, that everybody's playing, about how this group at MSNBC, Joy Reid put together this panel, or maybe it was Rachel Maddow, and it was all women that agreed with each other. And that's fine. That's good. That's whatever. But it's not very interesting. Everybody agrees with each other. Joy Reid got to say, Republicans were just a bunch of racists because they're voting so that they can keep all the brown people out. But here is the comment that raised so much ire that was made by Jen Psaki, who spent the first 2 years of the Biden administration defending these policies. She knew what happened on day one. She knew what policies were reversed. And here's what she had to say.
I mean, if you look at some of these exit polls, I live in Virginia. Immigration was the number one issue.
Yeah.
Again, these could change in Virginia.
Well, Virginia does have a border with West Virginia. Very, very contested area.
Build a wall. What? They're laughing. Build a wall. they're laughing, okay, because they have a border with West Virginia. West Virginians didn't like that too much. But they also had a murder of a 2-year-old child by a gang member, by an MS-13 member in Virginia. They also, in the last week, found the body parts of 2 people that they think were part of a gang killing. And I say body parts because they found the heads, and then they found the legs, and then they found the arms in a park. Okay? So the gang problem and the illegal immigration problem has gotten to Virginia. It's gotten to New York City. It's gotten to Chicago. It's gotten all over the place. And when you laugh at average people, I heard Meghan McCain say this comment when she was talking about her time on The View, and she said, I don't remember what the amount she said, but she said to the other women, you need to get out and start talking to people that make less than, I think it was $100,000. And then somebody chimed in and said, no, I think they'd only talk to people that make $1 million a year. But these women on this panel need to stop talking just to people that they agree with, because they're not talking to real people. Real people are concerned about the immigration problem. Now, there's some controversy over something that Congressman Mike Collins is going to be doing tonight at the State of the Union. He invited Laken Riley's family to come, and, of course, they don't want to be public. So he's going to allow his chair to be empty in honor of Laken Riley. And there are some people that think that's inappropriate, that he's using her. But I think I don't know, and maybe this doesn't make any sense, but it seems to me that if Joe Biden really meant what he said about understanding there's a border problem, which I don't believe he does, but what he should do is this. Before the State of the Union tonight, he should go ahead and sign the executive orders that will reverse all the policies that were in place when the Trump administration was over, and send them back to what the Trump administration did. And then at the State of the Union tonight, he ought to say, we're going to come to the table and we are going to negotiate on this, and we are going to take up House Bill 2, and you might not get everything you want, but we'll talk. That's what John Fetterman just recently said, even though he got an earmark for a gay teen party club in Pennsylvania in the budget bill that just came through, which I just think that's not something the federal government should be paying for, but, whatever. But he said he would take up House Bill 2, but the president ought to say he'll take it up, and if you want to name it the Laken Riley border bill, then we'll do that. The president needs to come to the table. He won't do it, but he needs to come to the table and say, I will do whatever it takes to get this through. Instead of what he has been doing, saying, I will not negotiate anymore. I will only sign this so-called bipartisan bill that was 3 senators that put it together. 3 is only 3% of the Senate. And you can't do something. Now, my proposal, which you can find on my Substack and also in the column that I wrote for Access WDUN and the staff blogs, my proposal is that you take House Bill 2, which has already been passed, the only bill that has actually been voted on related to immigration reform is House Bill 2. The Senate refused to bring up Joe Biden's bill that he said he put forward on day one. The Senate refused to vote on the so-called bipartisan bill. So no votes have been taken. Okay? And I don't buy this thing, you don't bring someone forward unless you know that you're going to win. Because you ought to have debate. You ought to put it forward. But if you really believe in this bipartisan bill, then add it as an amendment to House Bill 2, House Resolution 2, and then pass it, and then force the House to go to conference committee. You could have done that 14 months ago. You could have done that 13 months ago, 12 months ago, 10 months ago. You get my drift. They would rather have an issue that you can send an email out with a donate button than they would solve the problem. They could solve the problem if they wanted to. But the fact still remains, and this is a fact. This isn't an opinion. You can look at the numbers to bear it out. President Obama and President Trump did an infinitely better job at securing the border. You can measure it. You can look at it month by month. They had the exact same laws on the books that Joe Biden has right now. There were caravans coming our way during both of those administrations, but we stopped them at the border. So to say you got to have new legislation to fix this is just wrong. And to say you need more money is just wrong, because we are still operating on a budget level of COVID, which were $2 trillion deficits. We've got the money in the budget. We just can't stand giving up all our pet projects.
It's local radio, and that's why you're listening. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Buddy Carter's joining me right now, Congressman Buddy Carter, and it was an eventful night last night. It got off to a little bit of a late start, I think, because of those pro-Hamas protesters that were blocking traffic. But tell me a little bit about your thoughts.
Well, Martha, I thought I was going to a State of the Union address, and it turned out to be a Democratic pep rally. I thought it was I guess this is my 10th State of the Union address, and this was the most partisan one that I've ever witnessed. I mean, and it's so sad. This president just does not get it. He just does not understand what's going on in this country, in this world right now. I mean, he wants to talk about the border, and he's wanting to say, well, why didn't y'all pass this, and blaming us and pointing fingers at Republicans. Why didn't y'all pass this bill? We had a bill. No, you had an amnesty. You had an immigration bill. You didn't have a border bill. No, the border bill is H.R. 2. It's over there now.
But here's the thing. They haven't taken a single vote. He says that he put forth a bill on day one. Well, Democrats had control of the Senate on day one and on the House on day one. No votes were taken. He says that they have this compromise bill, and he wants to blame former President Trump, but not a single vote was taken. I suggested last week, you believe so much in this compromise, then take up House Bill 2 that has been sitting over there for 14 months, add your bill as a resolution, as an amendment, pass it, and then go to conference committee. I mean, come on, if you really believe it, take a vote. You haven't taken a single vote.
No, you're right. We haven't taken a single vote. And that, again, this is what the president doesn't understand. I mean, he wants to talk about the economy, and he's trying to convince us that, inflation wasn't at 7%. We've got it down to 3.7% now. Mr. President, when you took office, it was at 1.4%. Don't you realize people are hurting out there now? Don't you realize that day one you declared war on American energy, resulting in higher gas prices, resulting in higher food prices? Right now, the percentage of the average person's budget that is going toward food is higher than it has been in decades. And that's a direct result of his policy. That's why, Martha, elections have consequences, because policies have consequences, and the policies of this administration are wrong.
Well, and what he forgets is that the first year he was in office, the inflation was 9%. The second year was 8%. The third year may have been 3.5% to 5%, whatever it was. But that still is on top of the 17% it was up already. Okay, so the only way prices are going to come down is if you have deflation, which I know we don't want that. We don't want deflation, but we want prices to settle out a little bit. Now, John King of CNN said of the 36 State of the Unions that he has covered, that this was the most political. You know, the purpose of the State of the Union, I think, is to say what's going on policy-wise and to talk about what your vision is and what you need help from Congress about. He kicked off the speech with Ukraine, which I guess is okay, and January 6th. He pivoted to January 6th and somehow tried to make this connection between FDR in 1941 and, in January 1942 and now. And I don't think he made the connection, and I don't know what connection he was trying to make.
No, I didn't get the connection at all. And again, this is an example where this president just does not understand what's going on here. Look, we support Ukraine. Of course we do. We support Israel. We don't want Putin to be successful. We understand that. And we obviously want to take care of our friend Israel. But, Martha, when I'm in the district, the one question that I get most often is from people who look at me and say, how can you justify sending money to another country to secure their border when our border is not secure? And, there's really not a good answer to that.
So he did finally mention Laken Riley's name last night, although he called her Lincoln Riley, which is actually a Nebraska football coach from when he was a young man. So he somehow channeled the name Lincoln Riley instead of Laken Riley. But he did admit that an illegal immigrant killed Laken Riley. And 5 Georgia congressmen voted against the Laken Riley Act. There were 37 Democrats that crossed over and voted for it. Have you talked to any of your Democrat colleagues about the Laken Riley bill?
I have not. I have not had the opportunity. I saw a couple of them last night, but just didn't have the opportunity to ask them about that. I was very, very, very disappointed that they voted against it. We should have all been together on this, and putting politics aside, party politics should not have entered into this. As Georgians, we should have all been together on this. And, I was glad to hear, although, as you pointed out, he got the name wrong, but I was glad to hear at least he did try and repeat her name, because I think that in some way he is taking responsibility, as he should, for what happened to Laken Riley. Because it is the policies of this administration, it is the policies of Joe Biden that have resulted in Laken Riley's death.
Well,
She would still be with us if it had not been for this illegal immigrant coming across the border in 2022. If he had been detained in New York City, a sanctuary city, as he should have, for endangering a child. But no, he was in Athens, Georgia, and take the life of a young, aspiring, beautiful young lady who was going to dedicate herself to being the nurse to helping people.
Well, and also at the border, from what I understand, they know what day he crossed over, and that he did not actually meet asylum requirements. So he shouldn't have even been let into the country, but he was just let in. A couple questions, because looks like we got part of the funding issues taken care of. What's next as far as this fiscal cliff we're on?
Well, you're right. We did get 6 of the 12 bills done, and I was very proud of that. But let's keep in mind those were the 6 easy bills, and they only account for about 30% of the total budget. We've still got 6 of the most difficult bills and 70% of the budget that we've got to have done by March 22nd. That's a heavy lift. That's going to be tough. Now, I applaud the Appropriations Committee. The Cardinals are working diligently to try to get this done. Staff is working night and day to try to get it done. But I'm going to tell you, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be very difficult.
Well, Buddy Carter, we appreciate you calling in today. Any final thoughts you want to give us on last night?
Just, again, I thought I was going to State of the Union address, and it turned out to be a Democratic pep rally. It was the most partisan State of the Union address that I have witnessed in my 10 years in Congress. I was deeply, deeply disappointed.
And when they refused to arrest anti-Israel protesters, they arrested a Gold Star dad.
Putting the talk in news talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Representative Andrew Clyde is here with me today, and we wanted to get his thoughts. He was in the chamber. Andrew, it appeared it started a little late, I think, because the traffic related to the protests outside delayed the president getting there.
Good morning, Martha. Great to be with you. Yeah, that's kind of what our take was on it. But I'll tell you that, I get to sit there for over an hour, and I felt like I was yelled at by an angry old person. It was, to me, a campaign speech. It was not a State of the Union speech. It was not something to kind of draw us together, if you will. It was incredibly partisan and actually in many ways very offensive.
Yeah, and it really did not achieve what the State of the Union is supposed to achieve. Now, I understand he had a lot at stake. He's behind in the polls. He's got problems with Democrats. The laundry list of things are there. But he's in his role as President of the United States when he is at the State of the Union. He shouldn't be in his role as candidate. And I know the lines have been blurred a lot over the last few years, but it seems to me it showed a lack of leadership. What it was a laundry list. It didn't have anything to do with how to make things better.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the first things he started off with was talking about January the 6th. I mean, seriously, other than those folks that are still in prison that we still have to get out, all right, that unfortunately I think it's going to take a change in the presidency to truly accomplish that and to do that right. I'm saying we're over January the 6th, okay? That does not have an effect on our democracy, as he calls it. And then talking about Ukraine, but not ever mentioning the soldiers from Georgia that died, all right, from the Iranian-backed terrorists, the three of them that died in Jordan. I mean, he never mentioned their name. He has still, in his other State of the Union addresses, he's never mentioned the names of the 13 service members that died in Afghanistan. This president is so out of touch with our country. He must really not like our military, either that or he sees this as his failure, and he just doesn't want to mention it.
So I guess you were in the chamber when the Gold Star dad, you probably didn't know he was a Gold Star dad, heckled the president, and he was taken out and looked like he was put under arrest. Now, I don't know. He had handcuffs on in the pictures that were of him outside of the chamber. What was it like at that moment inside the chamber? Well,
he was behind me, literally directly behind me, up in the balcony, gallery. But what I heard, he called out his son's name, all right, and he called out his son's unit, all right. And as soon as I heard that, I knew exactly, that this had to be an individual, a family member, all right, of that Marine, okay, that died. And so, I'm thinking, oh my word, they're probably going to arrest him or do something to him or kick him out or whatever. But President Biden has refused to acknowledge the sacrifices of these military members. But yet he brings in the president of the UAW, all right, and he recognizes that. Are you serious? I mean, do you really, really think that that's important, but the sacrifices of our military members are not? That really upset me, Martha.
So we're in another day now. You guys have got a lot of work to do between now and the next deadline. But I guess my bigger question is, do you feel like for the next budget that you're working on, that you're going to have any better of a timeline than the one we're working on right now?
Are you talking about the next half omnibus? Or no,
I'm talking about where's the next half omnibus? Where is that, number one? But number two, once we get past that, we should start working on regular order for the next budget. So where is that process? Are we making any progress, I guess, is my question.
Okay. We have scheduled meetings, and we've scheduled folks to come in and talk to us, hearings for FY25, for the next fiscal year. That we have started. We've noticed it already. We haven't actually begun it yet because we have to finish FY24 first. I am not confident that we're going to have any greater success in the last half omnibus any more than we did in the first half omnibus. We spent more money than Nancy Pelosi did in FY23, and we got almost no good policy wins. So I put out an op-ed just a few days ago, and I talked about, what we need to do is go to that continuing resolution, all right, to the end of the year, which would literally have cut $100 billion out of federal spending, most of it, in fact, all of it, most of it, on discretionary, non-defense spending, which is basically all these weaponized agencies that are turning their anger and turning their government authority on the people of the United States. So that's what we should be doing. And then we'd eliminate the earmarks as well.
So do I understand that basically what we are doing is we are continuing COVID spending, even though COVID's over, okay, because we are just doing one continuing resolution after another. Am I right about that?
You are in one respect. We are continuing the COVID spending levels.
Or the levels of spending, right.
The levels of spending, but the appropriations actually have increased that level of spending. So these appropriations, all right, have not decreased as the good Republican appropriations that we passed out of the House did. All that got stripped out by the Senate. So we are actually spending more money than COVID levels, all right? And if we would go to a year-long continuing resolution, then it would implement the 1% tax, and it would also eliminate the $12.7 billion of earmarks, because you can't have earmarks in a continuing resolution. So that's one of the significant advantages of the CR to the end of the year. It would truly cut spending. Unfortunately, that's not what's happening.
So just to shift gears just a little bit as we go forward, and obviously I think that, I'm hoping that we have a different president next year. My biggest concern about the Trump era spending was that, and take COVID out of there because, COVID spending, we overdid it, and you talked about that at the time, Andrew, so you're on record there. But my concern is that the Trump administration in general did not talk a lot about budgets. They didn't talk a lot about spending restraints and that kind of thing. It was more like getting the economy going with reducing regulations and, doing all that sort of stuff and getting more revenue in. That was more, with the exception of the tax cuts, that was more the tack they took. Do you feel like he is looking at this differently this time, where he understands the budget situation is going to have to be taken under advisement in a little tougher way?
President Trump's a businessman, and I think his primary focus in his first administration was to get the economy going and to get the United States moving forward after the Obama administration. But I think he truly sees now the effect of massive government spending. We have a different Congress. We have, in my opinion, a more conservative Congress, one that believes in greater fiscal restraint, at least a section of us do. And that section is much larger now than it was when President Trump was in office. So I think that if we get him back in January, and I believe we will, that we will be able to, as a House of Representatives, be able to craft lower spending levels and be more effective in doing it. And I think the president will certainly go along with us in that.
Well, I certainly hope so. That is the one area that I think there could be drastic improvement, and I think you agree with me on that. And because we got to get this under control. Andrew, Clyde, thank you so much for being with us today, and we appreciate you always being available.
Thanks, Martha. Great to be with you on WDUN.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.